The day I got a notice from the HOA demanding my eviction from my own house was the day I knew I'd been marked by the neighborhood's reigning tyrant, Karen Wadsworth. I'm a cop, a detective with 15 years on the force, and I've dealt with my fair share of bullies. But Karen? She was a different breed. A clipboard-wielding, power-drunk HOA president who ruled our quiet suburban cul-de-sac like it was her personal fiefdom. My name's Jake, and I'd lived in this house for a decade. A modest two-story with a small garden I'd poured my heart into. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, paid off with years of overtime and sweat. The trouble started 6 months ago when I painted my mailbox a deep navy blue, a color that matched my squad car's decals. It was a small act of pride, nothing more. But Karen didn't see it that way. She stormed up my driveway the next morning, her sensible loafers clacking like gunfire, waving a dog-eared copy of the HOA bylaws. "This is a violation, Jacob," she barked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Article 7, Section 3. All mailboxes must be neutral tones. Navy is not neutral." I tried to laugh it off, explaining it was just a mailbox, but her eyes narrowed, and I could practically see the gears turning in her head. That was the moment I became her target. Over the next few months, she nitpicked everything. My grass was half an inch too long, my trash cans lingered curbside 5 minutes past pickup. My porch light was too bright for community standards. Each infraction came with a crisp letter slipped into my mailbox with her looping signature. I paid them at first, figuring it wasn't worth the fight, but the fines kept coming, each one steeper than the last. By spring, I was out $600, and my patience was thinner than the cheap paper she printed her notices on. I started documenting everything, every letter, every fine, every time Karen inspected my property, her beady eyes scanning for the tiniest flaw. I even set up a small security camera by my front door, the kind you can't see unless you're looking for it. It was a habit from the job, always have evidence. Then came the day that changed everything. I was working a late shift, chasing leads on a burglary case, when my phone pinged with a motion alert from my camera. I pulled up the feed, and there she was, Karen, in broad daylight, standing on my porch with a man I didn't recognize. He wore a polo with the HOA logo and carried a clipboard. But it was Karen leading the charge, pointing at my door like she owned the place. I zoomed in, my gut twisting as I watched her pull a key from her pocket and unlock my front door. My front door. She and her sidekick stepped inside, bold as brass, without a shred of permission. My blood ran cold. I'm a cop. I know what constitutes breaking and entering, and this was it. I called my partner, Mike, who was still at the precinct, and asked him to pull the property records for my address. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Meanwhile, I sped home, my cruiser's tires humming against the asphalt, my mind racing with questions. How did she get a key? What was she doing in my house? By the time I pulled into my driveway, they were gone, but the damage was done. My front door was slightly ajar, and inside my living room looked like a storm had blown through. Papers were scattered across my coffee table, my desk drawers were open, and a vase my late mom gave me lay shattered on the floor. I felt a hot surge of rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. I checked the camera footage again, saving every second of Karen's unauthorized entry. That's when I found the letter on my kitchen counter, typed on official HOA letterhead, signed by Karen herself. It was an eviction notice, claiming I'd violated multiple covenants and had 30 days to vacate my own home. A home I owned outright. No mortgage, no liens. The audacity hit me like a punch. Karen wasn't just petty. She was unhinged, thinking she could bully me out of my property with a piece of paper and a stolen key. I sat down, the letter trembling in my hands, and called Mike again. He confirmed what I suspected. My deed was clean, and the HOA had no legal authority to evict anyone, let alone a homeowner with clear title. But Karen's stunt wasn't just a power trip. It was a crime. Breaking into my house, rifling through my things, trying to scare me out of my own home. She'd crossed a line no badge, no bylaws could protect her from. I leaned back in my chair, the faint scent of my mom's broken vase still lingering in the air, and started to plan. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to make Karen regret ever stepping foot on my property. The next morning, I woke up early, my coffee bitter as I replayed the footage again. Karen's smug face as she unlocked my door, the way she strutted inside like she owned the place. It fueled me. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a detective, trained to build cases, gather evidence, and take down people who thought they were untouchable. Karen had no idea who she was messing with. I started by calling a locksmith to change every lock on my house, paying extra for high-security deadbolts. Then I printed out stills from the camera footage, time-stamped and clear as day, showing Karen and her accomplice entering my home. I filed a police report, listing the break-in and the vandalism, the broken vase, the scattered papers, as evidence of criminal trespass. My buddies at the precinct were already buzzing about it, shaking their heads at the gall of this HOA tyrant. I also reached out to a lawyer friend, Sarah, who specialized in property law. Over lunch, I showed her the eviction notice and the footage. Her eyes widened as she watched, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "Jake, this is gold," she said, a grin spreading across her face. She's not just in violation of HOA regulations. She's committed felonies. You've got her dead to rights. Sarah explained that HOAs can't evict homeowners, especially not without a court order, and Karen's actions, entering my home, issuing a baseless eviction notice, were not only illegal, but actionable. She suggested I take it to the HOA board first, to see if they'd rein her in, but I knew better. The board was Karen's personal fan club, a group of spineless neighbors who nodded along to her every whim. No, this wasn't going to be settled with a polite meeting. I needed to hit her where it hurt. Her reputation, her authority, and her freedom. I spent the next week gathering more evidence. I interviewed neighbors, discreetly asking if they'd seen Karen near my property, or if they'd received similar threats. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. Mrs. Larson, a sweet retiree down the street, confessed Karen had fined her $200 for planting roses without approval. Another neighbor, Tom, said she'd threatened to lien his house over a non-compliant fence. The pattern was clear. Karen was running a one-woman reign of terror, and people were too scared to fight back. I wasn't. I dug into the HOA bylaws, the same ones Karen loved to weaponize, and found a clause requiring board members to act in good faith. Breaking into a member's home? That was about as far from good faith as you could get. I also checked the HOA's insurance policy, public record at the county office, and discovered they had a fidelity bond to cover officer misconduct. If I could prove Karen's actions were intentional, the HOA could be liable for damages. My case was building, brick by brick, and I felt a grim satisfaction knowing I was closing in. But the real bombshell came when I traced the key Karen used. I called the previous owner's son, who'd sold me the house years ago, and asked if they'd ever given spare keys to the HOA. He laughed, saying, "No way. But Karen did ask for one when we moved in. We told her to get lost. That meant she'd either stolen it or had it copied illegally." Another nail in her coffin. By now, my anger had hardened into resolve. I wasn't just protecting my home. I was taking down a bully who'd terrorized the neighborhood for too long. I sat at my kitchen table, the eviction notice pinned under a coffee mug, and finalized my plan. Tomorrow, I'd confront Karen, not as a neighbor, but as a cop with a warrant for her arrest. The thought made my pulse quicken, but I wasn't ready to tip my hand just yet. I needed one more piece of evidence to seal her fate, and I knew exactly where to get it. I stared at the eviction notice under my coffee mug, its edges curling slightly from the heat, and felt a surge of determination. Karen Wadsworth had broken into my home, trashed my belongings, and tried to scare me out of my own house with her fake eviction stunt. But I wasn't just Jake the homeowner, I was Detective Jake Ramsey, and I'd spent years dismantling the schemes of people far smarter than her. The next morning, I woke up with a plan sharper than the broken shards of my mom's vase still scattered in my memory. My first move was to confirm how Karen got that key. I drove to the precinct and pulled in a favor from our tech guy, Ramirez, who could trace just about anything. I handed him the footage of Karen unlocking my door, and within hours he had a lead. A local locksmith who duplicated a key for an HOA emergency 6 months ago. The work order had Karen's name on it, and the locksmith, a nervous guy named Carl, admitted over the phone that she'd claimed it was for community maintenance. No authorization, no proof, just her word. That was felony number 2, illegal key duplication. I thanked Ramirez, saved the locksmith's statement, and added it to my growing file. Next, I needed to expose Karen's overreach to the HOA board, but not in a way that let her wiggle free. I knew the board was her puppet show, so I had to make it impossible for them to ignore her crimes. I called Sarah, my lawyer friend, and we crafted a letter to the board, citing the HOA bylaws Karen loved to quote. It laid out her trespass, the fake eviction notice, and the damages to my property, backed by the camera footage and the police report I'd filed. I requested an emergency meeting, knowing Karen would be there to defend her throne. Sarah also suggested I file a civil claim for damages, emotional distress, property destruction, the works, but I wanted her in cuffs first. The meeting was set for Friday evening at the community center, a beige box of a building where Karen held court. I spent the days leading up to it gathering more ammo. I canvassed the neighborhood, collecting sworn statements from neighbors who'd been bullied by Karen's fines and threats. Mrs. Larson gave me a copy of her $200 rosebush fine, and Tom handed over 3 letters threatening liens on his property. I also found out Karen had been skimming HOA funds, small amounts like $50 here, $100 there, for administrative expenses. A quick chat with the HOA's treasurer, a jittery guy named Phil who was terrified of Karen, confirmed she'd been submitting vague receipts for years. I got him to print out the financials, highlighting every questionable charge. By the time Friday rolled around, I had a folder thick with evidence. Camera stills, the locksmith's statement, neighbor complaints, and financial records. I walked into the community center, my boots echoing on the linoleum, and saw Karen at the head of the table, her arms crossed, her lips pursed like she'd bitten a lemon. The board, 5 nervous neighbors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, shuffled papers and avoided my gaze. I didn't waste time. I handed out copies of my letter, then played the security footage on my laptop. The room dead silent, as Karen's face appeared, unlocking my door and strutting inside. Gasps rippled through the board. Karen's face went from smug to ashen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "This is a misunderstanding," she stammered, but I cut her off, sliding the eviction notice across the table. "Is this a misunderstanding too, Karen? Threatening to evict me from a home I own outright?" I laid out the rest. Her illegal key, the neighbor complaints, the suspicious HOA expenses. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to Karen, who was now sweating through her blazer. I ended with a warning. "I'm a police officer, and I've already filed a report for criminal trespass. Either you remove Karen as president tonight, or I press charges, and the HOA's fidelity bond gets called in for her misconduct." The room froze. Phil, the treasurer, finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "I move to remove Karen Wadsworth as president, effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. Even Karen's biggest fan, a guy named Gary who always nodded at her rants, raised his hand against her. She stood, her chair scraping the floor, and hissed, You'll regret this, Jake. I just smiled. We'll see about that. That night, I finalized the paperwork for her arrest, with the footage, the locksmith's statement, and the fake eviction notice. I had enough for criminal trespass, vandalism, and fraud. I called Mike at the precinct, and by Monday morning, we had a warrant. I could have let another officer handle it, but this was personal. I drove to Karen's house, badge on my belt, and knocked on her door. When she opened it, her eyes widened, and for the first time, she looked small, her usual bravado gone. Karen Wadsworth, you're under arrest for criminal trespass, vandalism, and fraud, I said, cuffing her wrists as her neighbors peeked through their blinds. She sputtered, demanding her lawyer, but I read her rights and walked her to the cruiser. The look on her face, pure shock, like she'd never imagined consequences, was worth every fine I'd paid. At the station, Karen tried to spin some story about protecting the community, but the evidence was ironclad. The judge didn't buy her act either. She was charged with felonies and faced up to 3 years if convicted. The HOA, now under new leadership, issued a public apology and waived all my fines. They even replaced my mom's vase, though no one could replace the memories tied to it. I got a check from their fidelity bond for the damages, enough to redo my garden and paint my mailbox navy blue again, just to rub it in. The neighborhood felt lighter after that, like a cloud had lifted. Mrs. Larson planted more roses, and Tom fixed his fence without a peep from the new board. Karen moved away a month later. Her house sold quietly, her reign of terror over. I still live in my 2-story, my garden blooming brighter than ever. And every time I check my mailbox, I smile, knowing I didn't just beat Karen, I dismantled her empire. What would you have done? Share your own HOA stories in the comments below.